Hello, I'm Tom with a list of interesting things. And today, on the inaugural episode of the Interesting Book Club, we're going to do something a little different. I, because I'm stupid and I hate myself, am writing a book. It's called Water Pressure, or Nothing Bad Happens at the Bottom of the Sea. And I'm going to be reading the first chapter. As a sample chapter for the book, I hope that everyone enjoys it, but if they don't, that's okay. I enjoy it enough for everyone. Here we go. Chapter 1. The Descent. Transcript of interview with Ian James, sous chef aboard Oceanographic and Geographic Mining and Exploration Station C. Transcription notes and editing provided by Unit A6624797C, for internal use only. A clock ticks. Muffled speaking is heard, approaching as if from far away. A door opens. "We appreciate you coming, Mr. James. I know it's not been an easy time for you. Right this way. May I take your bag?" "Nah, I'll hang on to it. Thanks." "Has anyone offered you snacks, coffee, refreshment, anything like that?" The sound of a chair being pulled out is heard, scraping against the floor. "I'm all right. I just want to get this over with." "Very well. Please take a seat. I'm Alice Wright, and you of course know my associate, Mr. Richards. Let's get started with the interview. Scribe 61446 recording, statement taken 10/1941. This is pursuant to Article 311, Section 9, Subsection A, concerning the events aboard and around Oceanographic and Geographic Mining and Exploration Station C between the dates of August the 26th and September the 5th. Please state your name and former occupation for the record." "Ian James, former employee aboard Aurora Station." "Okay. And you are going to give us some insight regarding what happened down there. Go ahead and start whenever you're ready." "So what is it you want to know?" "We're just trying to get the story straight. Why don't you start from the beginning?" "You mind if I smoke? It might take a while." "Not at all." Subject lights a cigarette. "I worked aboard Station C. We were a mining station principally, mostly gold and manganese, I think, but occasionally they'd get bone fragments and old coins too, so Aurora was equipped with full biological and archaeological research wings. That's what we called it, Aurora Station. I guess Oceanographic and Geographic Mining and Exploration Station C was a little cumbersome, and Ocean XM3 sounded too corporate. At capacity, we had about 120 people on the station: researchers, mining techs, engineers, medics. There was a dry dock with a vehicle maintenance crew for away missions. Hell, we even had an HR department for when people had grievances, which wasn't rare. Stuck with the same people and no daylight for months on end, you tend to have spats. One or two brawls broke out during my time. The elevator broke once or twice, so we had to spend a week hungry. But all in all, it was a nice gig. When I joined up, I was officially the Assistant Nutrition Specialist, but I always called myself the sous chef. My job was kind of like the cook in a high school cafeteria. 3 meals a day, mass-produced and served in the mess en masse. With my time as a ship's cook, they hired me pretty much on the spot. I didn't mind the little quarters. It was better than bunking with 4 guys like I used to do, and the pay was really something. That was, 2 years ago. The weird stuff started happening just in the last few weeks. Sleeplessness, disappearances, distrust and discord across the whole station, not to mention the problem with the lights. But you're not interested in the day-to-day, are you? I guess you guys want to know what happened at the end. Okay. I was coming back from shore leave. A couple weeks before, I'd gotten word that my brother had taken a turn for the worse. He'd been in and out of the hospital for years. Brain cancer. So, I came back up on the elevator first I could. But by the time I got to the surface and caught a flight to San Francisco, he was already dead. I made it in time for the funeral, spent a week with family. My mom and dad were distraught, obviously, and Rich's kids were so young. I stayed with them as long as I could, not that it made any difference. I spent some time thinking about things, meeting with people, getting affairs in order. Must have been early August. After a while with the family in San Francisco and my parents in Boulder, I flew back into Daytona. I think I landed on the 23rd, and I was on the boat headed for the elevator on the morning of the 25th. Didn't talk to anyone on the boat ride. That's the thing about a big transport ship like that. You can barricade yourself in your quarters if you want. Nobody messes with you. The only thing that keeps you company on a 20-hour ride is the sound of the waves. I spent just about every second of the ride below decks. My window was just below the waterline. The inky blackness and the endless ebb were the only things down there with me. I'd stare out at the dark, thinking about things. Sometimes I'd imagine I could see the lights of the station dancing down in the deep. I wanted to be alone on that boat ride, but it's impossible to have privacy on the elevator. I always hated that thing. Subs are the way to go as far as I'm concerned. They give you motion and a sense of control, and if anything goes wrong, you know it's your fault. But not the elevator. It sits out there in the middle of the ocean, nothing around for leagues. The closest port city is St. John's, and the nearest settlement is Alea, 800 miles away. It's just a big platform, floating in the middle of the vast, dark nothing. It was cold when it came into view. Windy, with a moody, gray sky threatening to storm. You can barely see it as you're approaching. It's on this little island of rusted-out sheet metal. From maybe a mile off, you can see the elevator's casing sticking like a monolith out of the waves. There's a control station in the corner, not much more than a rusty outhouse, and there's 4 beams, almost as tall as the elevator casing. Those were the tops of the supports. Huge beams that stretched all the way to the bottom, holding the elevator and keeping the platform steady, making sure it doesn't buckle and sink into the depths. The elevator itself was there when we docked. Its airlock bay doors were open, yawning and dim. It was maybe 8 meters by 10, and tall enough for 3 people to stand on top of one another, but still lit by a single halogen strip on the ceiling. It brings everything. Just about everything the crew needs comes out of those doors. Food, water, and personnel go down. Mining shipments, research documents, and personnel come back up. Runs once a week. Once down on Wednesday mornings, once back up on Wednesday nights. All the way down. I shuffled off the boat with a couple other people, feeling as I did that the elevator with its jagged bottom and huge internal paneling looked a lot like a huge gaping mouth. There were maybe 4 or 5 people huddled in the elevator, trying to keep their bags out of the wind. My combat boots clanged on the sheet metal grates. I looked down and I could see through the lattice into the deep. Every few moments a wave would rise and breach the grate like dishwater through a colander. A rolling hill of water would appear beneath my boots and slide the length of the platform. All I had with me was my backpack and a duffel, but probably 80 or 90 crates were already on the platform, ready for transport. The elevator was ready for departure, with the payload piled up halfway to the ceiling and with benches around the outside. Standing, checking a clipboard against the crates, was all 5 feet of Rick. She'd been gone a couple months, off visiting her husband and kids in Detroit, I think. She had her duffel bag slung over her back and her accordion clipped to her waist. She nodded and grinned at me when I walked up. She tossed me a clipboard and told me to check the foodstuffs while I prepped for descent. My mind was still with my brother and my meetings, but I checked the shipment anyway. Everything was on the manifest. Mail, personal packages, electronic parts, tools, and every food item we'd eat for the next week at least. Even after everything that happened, that manifest is still burned into my mind. Produce, 3 cases of peas, 2 of broccoli, 2 of oranges, 8 of potatoes, 8 of black beans, all fresh. Protein, 6 cases of halibut, 3 cases of shrimp, 3 of chuck, 6 of chicken, all frozen, half a case of salmon, fresh. I was planning a sushi night. 8 cases each of rice, barley, flour, 2 cases each of milk and eggs. I always liked to do a little baking when I could. 1/8 of a case each of black pepper, salt, cinnamon, parsley, and imported parsley. Imported parsley being code for marijuana, obviously. Plenty of alcohol. 1 case each of rum, whiskey, tequila, vodka, all assorted with various preferences by the crew. Tried to order what they wanted when I could, since I doubled as bartender down there on the weekends. Lots of beer, mostly cheap. I can still see the sheet clear as day. I remember the brand of grapefruit juice and the amount of Bazooka Joe bubblegum that I special ordered for Woods, down to the number of packs. I have trouble remembering who was on shift at the end, or Rick's middle name, or Cortez's voice, but I can remember exactly what was on the shipment that day. Weird how memory works sometimes, huh? Subject pauses. Subject pulls from a cigarette. Anyway, Rick and I finished the check. We chatted a bit, but I don't remember most of it. She talked about her kids in her hometown. I could tell she wanted me to talk about my brother, but I just let her talk. It took maybe 20 minutes to check the inventory, and by the time we were done, the last of the departing crew had gotten onto the boat and weighed anchor. When I signed the bottom of the manifest, I could still see the shape of the ship in the distance. The crew boarding the elevator were seated on the little benches that lined the windows. There were only 4 of us on the elevator that day. It was me, Rick. There was a new kid, kind of weedy looking. Figured she was probably there to fill a vacancy in one of the science wings. And the station director, Everett Linden. Nothing but the 4 of us and the retreating ship for 1,000 miles. The new kid looked a little nervous, but she had that wide-eyed look about her. You know the one. She was short with one of those long braids all the way down her back, and she clutched her bag like it was going to fly away. She sat on one of the long benches, her back to the window. Rick checked off the last few items on a clipboard, and I closed the door with a lingering, clattering clang. Rick swiped her keycard, and the pressure lock sealed. The steady beat of the waves and the howling of the wind vanished with a pneumatic hiss. For a moment it was silent as the grave in the elevator. Then there was a small shudder, a soft mechanical wheeze, and we started to move. The metal grate rose up, then the lapping waves broke silently against the glass that surrounded us. Then there was only gray-blue darkness that slowly gave way to black. Rick sat down and leaned against the glass. As we trundled down, she pulled from her hip a tattered old accordion. It was small, maybe the size of a tea saucer, and each side fit in her hand nicely. She played a few experimental notes to warm the dusty old instrument up. Linden, tall and gray-haired, with a red satin shirt, stood facing out of the elevator, and the kid came and sat closer, her eyes bright. Rick struck up a tune, some jaunty sailing thing, and the kid started singing along. Heavenly Father, save our ship, we know not where we go, and we surely haven't sinned enough to end up down below. We say our prayers and sing your praise in your Bible we all know, and we surely haven't sinned enough to end up down below. They went on for a verse or two about what they would do with drunken sailors, and by the 3rd verse I had joined in, and Linden was singing backup for the chorus. By the time we finished the Wellerman, we were all in good spirits. The kid and I laughed as everyone stopped. Linden and Rick both cracked smiles too, though I think Linden tried to hide it. I felt like I had forgotten about the problems that weighed on my mind, and everyone seemed much more at ease in spite of the oppressive dark all around us. After an hour or so, Rick seemed to relax, and she settled back into some tuneless notes. The kid leaned to Rick with a somewhat more easygoing smile on her face. "That's some great playing," she said. "Thanks, my granddad taught me," Rick replied. Her smile was broad. "You're new here, aren't you?" The kid nodded emphatically. "Prospective archaeological assistant Leah Little, reporting for duty." "It's great to meet you. We're glad to have you on the team," Rick said. She clapped me on the shoulder with an accordion-free hand. "This ugly mug is Ian James, sous chef. You're going to want to be friends with him as long as you want edible food." I extended a hand that she shook. She smiled broadly. Excitement was brimming in her eyes. "That good-looking fellow over there with the gray hair you might know," Rick continued. "Everett Linden, Director of Station Operations. He's all of our boss's boss, but don't let that intimidate you. From what I can hear, he still can't boot up his computer on his own." Linden, who had his hands behind his head and his eyes closed, smirked at these words. "I just like giving the IT department something to do so they don't hide under the exhaust couplers all day like you, Rick." He stood and shook Little's hand. Her face faltered somewhat. I supposed she must have been nervous about meeting the director. Little recovered herself quickly and then laughed. I chuckled with her, but Rick rolled her eyes. "You know I wouldn't have to spend all day under them if you'd let me replace them all." Linden went back to leaning and relaxing against the glass. "But if we fixed everything, then we wouldn't have a reason to keep you around, would we? And what would we do without all your charm and wit, Rick?" Rick looked irritated, but Linden seemed to miss it. Rick went on to finish. "And I'm Deputy Chief Engineer Susan Rickard, but if you ever call me Susan, I'll break your hand. Call me Rick." Rick extended her hand with a smile, and Little shook it warmly, though she looked a little seasick. She turned and watched the ocean out the window. Her reflection in the window was pale as she watched the sea slide past. End Chapter 1. I hope you've enjoyed this sample chapter. If you have, please let me know. There will be more to follow. And until next time, I hope that you will be like this book. Ambitious. Maybe even a little overly so. But perseverant. And above all, and with any luck, interesting. I'll see you next time.